Hi, my name is Jason Koo, and in celebration of Pi Day, I would like to show how to install Neo4j version 5 onto a Raspberry Pi. Now, if you've never worked with a Pi before, one of the first things you're going to have to do is install the OS onto a micro SD card. Now, a Pi uses a micro SD card for running its OS and for storing local files. To do this, I completely recommend using the official Pi Imager. It is an app that makes this process way less painful than it used to be. Okay, so just go to Raspberry Pi's official site and download the Imager for your OS on your laptop or desktop. And once you have it installed, you'll get this nice mini application. And you will start on the left with selecting the OS you want to install on the Pi. Now, I recommend the topmost option, which includes the GUI, because if you have a spare monitor and a keyboard, you can access and configure the Pi should the headless setup not work. So select that first option. And then the second button is the option to choose where you would like this OS written to. Now, obviously, you should choose the micro SD card that you have planned for installing into the Pi. It shouldn't bring up your current drive. Definitely do not choose that option if it does appear. Okay, so the third option you want to do before you write to the card is to click on that configure or gear icon, which brings up the settings. Now, in the settings, you have quite a few options here. The first thing you can do is you can change the name of the Raspberry Pi device itself. I am going to leave it at the default, leave it as the default Raspberry, and then I'm going to enable the SSH. Now, SSH is required if you want to tunnel in remotely using your existing laptop or desktop to control and configure the Pi that is on the same network. Okay, next option is to change the username and password. Again, I'm going to use the default here because my intent is to create an image for other people to download and then update this on their own. If you're doing this at home for yourself, I definitely recommend not using the default Pi username and Raspberry password. Okay, continuing. The next option here is here you can put in the Wi-Fi SSID and password for your local setup. Here, this is mine, which I am promptly going to have to update and change after I post this video, or probably before I post this video. But yeah, configure this to match your SSID and your Wi-Fi password so that the Pi can immediately be accessible from your development machine without needing to hook up the Pi to its own monitor and keyboard. Okay, moving on here. The next thing you want to do is just configure locale settings, right? So we're going to check the US location for both time and also keyboard configuration. Once that's done, click Save, and now you're ready to write. So you can click on that last button. And here there's a last minute warning to warn you that everything on that SD card is going to be wiped, right? So make sure if it's not a fresh card, be sure to copy over or duplicate any important information before you click yes here. Now, if you have something else to do, or you want to grab a drink or use the restroom, now is definitely the time, because the write and validation process will probably take a few minutes. Here I've sped up the process so that we don't have to wait those few minutes. And once it's done, it will give you a message and you can continue. Once that is done, the card should have been automatically ejected. So you can just pop that right out of your laptop. And then what you're going to do is you're going to very lovingly grab your Raspberry Pi, look at it, and then flip it over and take that micro SD card and dramatically put it into the Raspberry Pi, flip it over, plug it in, and that Pi is good to go. Now, once the Pi is up and running, you can tunnel in using, for example, here I'm using the terminal app for a Mac. To tunnel into the Raspberry Pi, you're going to run the command SSH, and then you're going to put in the username at the device name of the Pi. So since I'm using the default for this Pi, it's going to be SSH Pi at raspberry.local. Now, the first thing your terminal is going to bring up is asking you if you want to accept the SHA fingerprint of the device as an acceptable device to connect with. So just click yes, and then immediately afterwards, you will enter in the password for the Pi. Now again, in my case, I've installed the default username password. So again, it is Raspberry for the default password for a Pi. Once it's connected, you can see here on the command line that it is asking you to please change your username and password because it is way too easy to guess. So if this is your personal device, definitely do that at this point. Okay, so on this fresh OS, I know that Java is not installed. But if you are using your own Pi and you're adding in Neo4j to work with it, this is the point where you would start. And the first thing you would want to do is check to make sure that the Java version that you have is compatible with Neo4j. In this case, we want to see Java JDK 17. Now, again, on this OS, I don't have Java on it at all, so I'm going to have to install it. And the commands for installing Java JDK 17 is going to be in the description. So you can check there because this is probably flying by a little too fast. And once the JDK has been installed, you can check again, just do java-version and it'll hopefully read 17. Once that is done, the next step is to install Neo4j itself. In this case, I am downloading Neo4j 5.50, the Enterprise Edition. Once that is complete, I can just put the path. I can just include the path and then run Neo4j Neo4j space start. And if you had happened to download the Community Edition, then you're good to go from here. If, like me, you use the Enterprise Edition, you're going to have to first accept the Enterprise License Agreement. And again, the commands for accepting the license is both printed in the console and available in the description. Now, the licenses come in two flavors, commercial and evaluation. Now, if you're getting, you're already an existing enterprise client and you're ready to go into a production setting, select the commercial license. Otherwise, if you're trying this out for the first time, select the evaluation option and you can move forward. The next step that you need to do to make the database accessible remotely is to modify the conf file. Once you bring that up, just scroll down a little ways and you're looking for the server default address line. And it'll just point to 0.0.0 and just uncomment it. Do that, save the file, and now go and start your Neo4j instance. You should get a console output like this telling you that you may have to wait a few more seconds for the server to actually be available. Now, from here, you can connect to the database using any one of the Neo4j client libraries, or easier to test, you can just use a browser on your laptop and just access the database that way. Okay, so I'm just going to open up Google Chrome, and in the URL bar, just put in HTTPS or HTTP, and then the Pi address, same as the SSH address. So address is HTTP pi@raspberry.local, and then the port number 7474. Once you put that in, you will see the Neo4j browser, and it will immediately ask you to enter in a username and password to access the database. Now, a fresh database instance will just default to username password of Neo4j for the username and Neo4j for the password. Once you've successfully logged into the database, it will immediately prompt you to update the username and password. Okay. So that's basically it. All you would need to do to get Neo4j running on a Raspberry Pi. If you are wanting to start up the database locally in this fashion, this is all you need. If you are like me, you will want to run this instance of Neo4j on a Raspberry Pi with the database starting up every time the Raspberry Pi is restarted. I am going to show you how to configure systemctl to spin up the Neo4j database with each restart. Okay, so to prepare Neo4j for use with systemctl, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the folder, the Neo4j folder that I downloaded, and move a copy to the /opt folder. Now this folder is protected, so the write permissions and read permissions for that folder is a little bit different. It's fine when using systemctl to spin up Neo4j within this folder. But, so you may be thinking, why didn't I just download it into the /opt folder in the first place? And if I was only using Neo4j in this instance that I'm showing you now, which is to auto start the database instance when Raspberry Pi restarts, that would work perfectly fine. However, if you don't want to run that setup and you just want to run Neo4j every once in a while on the Pi, then the earlier described method is the way to go, right? It's the easiest way to do it. You could still download it into the op folder and then update some permissions, and that may work. I found that a little complicated and it didn't quite work the way I wanted. I think I messed up the permissions in some form or fashion in that process. Anyways, the process that I decided to go with was this method of having Neo4j in its own folder inside the root folder so that I can access it independently of an auto start option. Okay, so I've got the folder moved into the op folder, and then what I'm going to do is add a symlink to designate basically this enterprise folder as being the Neo4j folder, and that way I can adjust the symlink later if I want to use a different edition. Okay, then I'm going to add a new Neo4j user, and I'm going to update permissions for that user to access the Neo4j enterprise folder. I'm going to create a Neo4j.service file and just copy and paste this configuration information here. Again, this is going to be available in the description, so you can just copy and paste that right in. And this is what the systemctl will use to spin up and run the Neo4j database. Okay, go ahead and save and exit that file. Then to make sure the systemctl sees this new configuration, you're going to have to type in systemctl daemon-reload. And what that will do is it will restart systemctl so that it can see this Neo4j service configuration file. You're going to have to enter your Pi password again to authenticate. After it's authenticated, you're going to then do systemctl enable Neo4j, which will actually tell systemctl to add this to kind of the startup process. And you will again enter in the Raspberry Pi password. And once that is fully authenticated, then what you can do is test the whole thing out by restarting the Raspberry Pi. Now here I am restarting remotely using sudo reboot now. And what that will do is it will break the pipe that I have in connection with the Pi now. Once that's done, I'm just going to log right back in, and I'm going to check to see if Neo4j did indeed start. And I'm going to use systemctl to double check that the Neo4j database has indeed started. Now, I could do this any number of ways, right? I could have just used a client library and accessed the database, or use the browser again to check. But here I'm just going to use systemctl space status space Neo4j, which will give me an output. It should say that Neo4j is running, and it'll give me some additional addresses I can use to compare. And it should be good to go. Now, if you do not see this console output, if you don't see this AOK message, there are some possible areas that might have gone astray during the installation process. The first thing I would look at is the Java install. Make sure that, again, JDK 17 is installed and is running. The next possible hiccup area could be with permissions. So check the permissions of the enterprise folder that was moved into the op folder. And then the last thing to check is the neo4j.service file that was used to configure systemctl. Now, if there's a typo in the configuration, or maybe the symlink isn't running correctly or hasn't been set up, then this will also not run as expected. So Neo4j should be running on your Raspberry Pi now. So good luck with your project moving forward. I definitely have some fun projects planned for my Pi running Neo4j on it. So I'll be producing hopefully some additional videos and some blogs on what those future projects are. But I'm definitely curious to know what you might be doing with a Pi and a graph database on it. So definitely leave me a comment in the comments. Leave me a comment in the comments. Leave a message in the comments if you got something fun you want to share. Otherwise, if you've got any questions that I didn't quite resolve here, ping me again, leaving a message in the comments or finding me on social. All right. Thank you, everybody. Good luck and have a great Happy Pi Day.